So hello everybody and welcome to my review of Caliban, who is, at the time of recording of this video, the newest Warframe that was added into the game. The reason I say this is because number one, he may change in the future, and number two, he doesn't have any augments yet, so I would highly recommend, if you are watching this in the future, to check out the official Wikipedia website that I will link in the video description. Now Caliban has a pretty interesting passive, one of the better ones for sure. It's called Adaptive Armor and it works kind of like adaptation. When you're hit with certain type of damage, you will adapt to that damage and take a less of it in the future. This caps out at 50% and it stacks by 5% every time you are hit with that type of damage. So if you take slash damage 10 times, you're gonna have 50% damage reduction towards slash. It doesn't last forever though. For every 5 seconds you don't take that type of damage, it's gonna reduce that reduction by 2%. Now, even though this doesn't stack with adaptation, and adaptation is of course better because it stacks all the way up to 90% damage reduction, it is better in one major way. It's granted to all allies within the affinity sharing range, which is huge, so if your allies are anywhere near you, they're gonna get this as well. So yeah, as I've said, definitely one of the better passives. So Caliban's first ability is called Razor Gyre, where he will spin around and every half second inflict 500 slash damage to all enemies within 12 meters of him. But that's not all, because every time it does damage, it also restores 4 health to Caliban, and the damage has a chance to stagger the enemies, plus it has a 10% chance to leave behind a slash proc as well. And there is still more, because if you hold down the primary fire button, it will cause Caliban to start spinning faster and faster and faster the more you hold it, which will make you do more damage, but it will unfortunately make it drain more energy as well. And finally, if you aim at an enemy and tap the fire button while spinning around, you will quickly dash to them, which will deal 500 impact damage to all enemies within 10 meters of the impact, and it will knock them down. Though one thing to bear in mind here is that if you spun Caliban up by holding the attack button, if you dash towards an enemy, you will lose it all and he will start spinning at the base speed, whether you hit the enemy or not. Now the ability costs 25 energy to activate, which is affected by power efficiency, and it then drains 4 energy per second, which is affected by efficiency and duration. With the energy drain, of course, growing in strength if you decide to make Caliban spin faster by holding the fire button. And other than that, power strength will increase the damage as well as the healing of this ability, and power range simply increases the radius in which you can hit enemies. Caliban's second ability is called Sentient Wrath, where he stomps the ground and sends out a radio wave of energy that does 1000 impact damage to any enemy hit and lifts them off the ground. Now the ability costs 50 energy to cast, which is of course affected by power efficiency, and the wave is sent out in a sort of half circle in front of Caliban with a maximum range of 22 meters, which is affected by power range. That's not all though, because enemies hit by this wave get a debuff on them, which increases their damage taken by 35% for 10 seconds. You do have to bear in mind though that this ability does have a cap on how many enemies it can hit, which is 16 by default. However, the number of enemies you can hit, the damage the ability does, as well as the power of the debuff that increases damage taken are all affected by power strength, so you can juice all of those up. Plus, the duration of the debuff is affected by power duration, so you can make it last more than 10 seconds as well. And one final thing here, if you're spinning around with the Razor Gyre, you can actually cast Sentient Wrath, and the cast time is going to be significantly faster than if you're casting it on its own. This ability can actually do a decent amount of damage in lower level missions, and it's a good crowd control ability as well, because it covers a huge area and it will pass through terrain. It doesn't just poof away if you hit something with it. It does lock you into its cast animation though, which is pretty lengthy, so please be careful when using this at higher levels. Caliban's third ability is called Lethal Progeny, where he can summon up to 3 conquilists to help him in battle. These guys are actually pretty cool, even though they suffer from a pretty common pet problem in that sometimes they can be pretty daft. But they do pretty good damage, whether it is with their auto attack or their Rufflecopter whirlwind attack. They are fairly beefy, and when they're near you they can restore 25 shields per second, which can generate overshields. They can also roam around in a fairly large area. They only teleport back if they wander more than 40 meters away from you. Now you can only ever have 3, you can't push that any higher or lower, but their rank or level, their damage, the amount of shields per second they restore, as well as their health are all affected by power strength. Then we have their duration, which is actually fairly short by default, it's only 25 seconds, however you can increase that with power duration. And finally, the ability costs 50 energy per conquest, so if you want to summon all 3 of them at once, it's gonna be 150, which is quite a lot, but you can bump that down with power efficiency. These guys, as I've said already, are actually very cool. Their damage is quite nice, especially if you debuff the enemy with Sentient Wrath first, but their main problem is the way they move around. They are somewhat slow and sluggish. But they're definitely worth using because they will draw enemy attention, so not everything is going to be trying to shoot at you. Some of them will target the sentient instead, and the energy restoration with bonus overshields is just superb. And Caliban's fourth and final ability is called Fusion Strike, where he fires out a beam from either of his hands as well as his torso and then brings all the beams together into a massive implosion that does a buttload of damage and strips away enemy armor. This ability costs 100 energy to activate, which is of course affected by power efficiency, and the beams as well as the implosion will do 5000 blast damage, which is affected by power strength. Now by default, this ability strips 50% of the enemy armor and shields, but if you get at least 100% bonus power strength, it will strip all the armor and shields permanently. And the way it does it is as soon as the central beam touches the surface, it creates a lingering area that has a base range of 10 meters that strips the enemy armor. And it lasts for 15 seconds by default. Now power strength, as I've mentioned already, affects the amount of armor and shields that the ability strips, but it also affects the damage. Then we have power range, which affects the range of the beams, which by default is 30 meters, the range of the implosion, which by default is 10 meters, as well as the area the implosion leaves behind. And finally, there is power duration, which affects the duration of the lingering area the implosion leaves behind. So, this review was actually rather quick, was it not? Yes, it was, but that's because Caliban's abilities are fairly straightforward, and as of time of recording of this video, he doesn't have any augments yet. I genuinely have no idea what people actually think about Caliban, but I personally enjoy him an awful lot. I love having 3 pets running around doing my busy work, and his other abilities are actually very nice. The only one that's a bit meh is actually Razor Gyre, so if you're gonna put on a subsume ability, definitely replace that. The problem with it is that it either doesn't do an awful lot of damage if you don't spin up, but if you do spin up, it starts to drain too much energy. That's probably my biggest complaint about Caliban, with the second one being about the conquelists, in that they just are a bit dumb sometimes. So hopefully in the future we can get an augment that lets us summon, I don't know, Battalists, something that has ranged weapons basically. Other than that, you have an awesome crowd control ability with Sentient Wrath that can actually do decent damage in lower levels and just straight up clear rooms for you. And finally there is Fusion Strike, which is absolutely fantastic. Yes, the damage is blast, which is unideal, but there's a lot of it, and the armor and shield strip are just fantastic. So for me, Caliban definitely gets a thumbs up. I would highly recommend you give this Warframe a try. It's pretty cool. And that's pretty much it for the video. So I thank you very much for watching. As always, guys, I would like to extend a special thank you to all the channel members. Thank you very much, guys. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.